No, the book's out, and how long did it take you to write?
18 months.
18 months.
It was born on the day that I read the newspaper, and Shane Warne was on the front page, and he was, I think, bare-chested himself and wearing some Playboy underpants with a inflatable sort of dirigible, really, out the front, and a couple of what seemed to be paid ladies in the room with him. And I thought, oh God, that would be, if you were 16 or 14, if Warren had kids of that age group, that would be a tough day at school the next day. And I thought I might try and have a go at doing. I think all novels kind of start with a what if. My first novel, Players, started with the what if. The publicity-driven footy show actually stooped to faking a tumour in order to get sympathy and publicity for the show. And this what if was what if a kind of scandal hit sports star or ex-sports star had a family that had to deal with that scandal. And so Making News is very much about the construction of the scandal and the deconstruction of it after it's occurred.
And Tony's first novel, Players, is about... This is actually how I met Tony, was through this book, going on your show at Triple R. And I'd been avoiding your novel. Everyone had been telling me that Players was a hilarious book, and I went, oh, it's about football. I don't want to read something about football. And then you gave me a copy of it. I'm going, oh, I'm going to have to read it now. And and I read it, and it's hilarious. And, of course, it's not really about football at all. It's about footy-tainment, which I understand is something that when you're a footballer, you have to go along, as well as going to training for football, you have to go along to footy-tainment coaching.
At draft camp now, I think this is true, that the young kids actually get rated according to their kind of ability to deal with the banalities of the sports media. And so they actually get trained into all that, just hoping that we can do our bit. And obviously Bull Durham has the perfect couple of paragraphs that's ever existed on how banal you can be with the media. But they get trained in that, and so I guess I actually would like to become a consultant to this generation of footballer, because I think they're doing themselves out of millions of dollars. Even just today, Jason Ackermanis has just been sacked by the Bulldogs. All that is, I know, just a wash of words going over Tony there.
He's the one who looks like a pirate.
Yeah, he does look like a pirate.
So I know that.
And we're going to get to that.
We'll get to piracy and Buccaneers.
But Jason Ackermanis, he doesn't seem to be able to hold down a job as a footballer because he speaks his mind, but he is due for a date with millions of dollars after he finishes, because he actually speaks in proper sentences that make sense, where he states his opinion. And he is going to become a very rich person. And my view is that these media trainers, as they bludgeon the naras into submission, are actually costing these people millions of dollars in the afterlife of football. And you've got a guy like Bob Murphy writing a column in The Age each Wednesday where he talks about his dog and coffees and just things that are normal. He's going to be also very well sought out. He's going to be a popular post-career person as well.
Well, this book, Players, is about the world of footy-tainment, and it's about, as you say, it's about a man who does vox pop interviews for a footy show, headbutts an old man in the street in order to turn public sympathy back towards him, fakes having cancer. And as I like to point out, Sam Newman eventually got his revenge by contracting cancer in real life, thus ensuring that Tony could never make a TV series out of that book without looking like an arsehole.
Would look like an arsehole. Very bad taste, and really both a bittersweet day, because there's nothing like knowing that you've got the power of the moz or soothsaying or whatever I've got, pointing the bone or something, but it's also, it is that bittersweet moment when you realise just what a prick you'd be if that was made into a TV series, which was the plan at the moment the tumour hit. And I can speak flippantly about it at the moment because I understand the treatment has gone very well. And I'm certainly wishing him a good recovery, as much as I'm not wishing him else much good. But
but Tony, of course... Many of you would know Tony from the Breakfasters, 6 years on the Breakfasters, and I remember you saying, I'm quitting the Breakfasters, I'm going to sequester myself away and write this novel for a year, and it took a year and a half, and you wrote most of it on the grounds of the Abbotsford Convent, correct?
Yes.
And
I've got a room there at the Abbotsford Convent, a beautiful spot to work.
But you told me that in order to get there, quite sort of, choosy about who will work there, and most of the people who get an office at the Abbotsford Convent are like social justice, holistic healing, that kind of thing. You've got to be contributing to society. You were able to convince them that writing a satirical novel about the media was helping society.
Absolutely.
And got in there.
Someone has to deconstruct this behaviour, and Making News does it. I'm trying to think of the scenes. I've got a scene where the sort of hard-nosed reporter chases a sibling pair of a pregnant dwarf and her sibling partner. She's accidentally got pregnant to her sibling, this dwarf couple. And this reporter is chasing them through the streets of Ballyracray. And I think that has a social merit to it, to bring that sort of behaviour into the open, and not just to exploit it for comic potential, but in fact show the depths to which the behaviour stoops, and really what sort of a society we live in terms of tabloid domination and celebrity culture.
Well, there's a great phrase which I learnt in this book, because I remember years ago reading an interview with someone who was an editor of a Rupert Murdoch paper in London, and he said that Rupert Murdoch's catchphrase to all of his editors was keep them angry, keep them stupid, which is a reference to the general public. You keep them angry with articles about, things like the killer was seen to smile as he left the courtroom. What a bastard. And you keep them stupid by, having an article about Nicole Kidman or having who's been voted out of MasterChef on page 4 like it's news. And if you keep people distracted with things like that, then they won't ask more important questions. But what is this phrase? I don't want to get it wrong. So
we'll read this. It only goes for one page, so hopefully it won't take too long. But this was borrowed from my brother-in-law. Worked at the Herald Sun for 10 years as a photographer, and he said that a wise old copy editor told him the mantra, "Nah, mate, there's only 3 things you need to know about getting a story into the Herald Sun. These 3 words," and that inspired this passage of the book. Lucas is tailing a Muslim a classmate who is going on to a double-decker bus. Lucas is the he's the kid of the football player who has an internship at a tabloid newspaper. Charlie was the one who had made him conscious of terror hysteria. Only a few days previously, the topic had come up at the Decker dinner table. He's the footballer, is Charlie. Giles is the editor. According to Giles, you can measure a story's success on a tabloid storyometer, Lucas announced. Charlie nearly snorted out a partially chewed mouthful of potato. And does he hang one of these storyometers from that hippopotamus neck of his? He says it's a 3-part test, that every story should fit into one of the following categories. Tut tut, poor bastard, that's weird. If it isn't one of those 3, it isn't a story. Charlie had rattled his cutlery into his plate. Those 3 categories don't nearly cover it. He left out 3 cheers for our boys. He left out hasn't this bird got massive jugs. He left out all politicians are arseholes. And he left out the big one, be afraid. Be afraid of violent crime. Be afraid of sick bastard pedophiles. And especially be afraid of Muslims. Those stories carry a fair bit more whack than tut tut. Well, aren't they right? Monica had said. She's the self-help writing partner of Charlie. Shouldn't we be afraid of Muslims? At least a bit. It's not like Al-Qaeda doesn't exist. It's not like the London bombings didn't happen. And Charlie shrugged and spoke softly, almost to himself. I guess, but personally I'm more afraid of Anton Giles and his damn storyometer than I am of the coming crusades. Nobody in this country knows a thing about other cultures because the popular press is full of Britney Spears' knickers and other such bullshit. We just get stupider and stupider. It's the lack of understanding that'll start the war between Islam and the West. Monica snorted. You think Osama bin Laden is trying to understand us? The whole problem is that that monster can't sit down and enjoy a good tabloid yarn about Britney Spears' knickers or the absence thereof. I bet he does in private, dirty hypocrite. Save us this understanding, claptrap Charlie. I'm all for understanding. I mean, you've both read String Theory, where I say that we're not playing solo instruments, but a part of a great human orchestra. But honestly, Charlie, there's no point trying to understand Osama bin freaking Laden. Charlie had deflated in his chair, eyes downcast, some roast pumpkin with his fork, he raised it slowly mouthwards and chewed. Monica continued eyeballing him, her thin arms hanging slightly wide of her body as if spoiling for a fight. When it didn't come, she turned on Lucas. Ask your beloved Anton Giles about that paper bag thingy. Which of the three types of story was that? Probably tut-tut, Lucas said, for chasing publicity. I don't chase publicity. But you don't chase it, but anyway, Christine says they didn't mean for you to be there. You think I chase publicity? Monica's hands crept to her hips. Lucas didn't say anything. It's my job to generate some publicity, Monica said, exasperated. Lucas glanced at Charlie. His father was attempting to hide his expanding grin behind a serviette. You can laugh, Charlie. At least I have a job. And it's not like you two are wallflowers when it comes to being in the papers. You've both got columns. Had a column, Charlie said. That's right, I forgot. You have absolutely no job at the moment, do you? It leaves me more time to be part of the great human orchestra. And that was how their conversation on the Clash of Civilizations had ended. Monica storming out of the dining room, leaving son and husband behind, the two of them waiting a respectful number of seconds before the laughing began.
The only time I've really been in the tabloid press was when, as people would know, I had a massive falling out with Mick Molloy over a film called Boytown Confidential, and it was all covered in the Herald Sun, and it was big news for a couple of days. And I'm one of these people who'll I'm going, well, let's get some comedy out of it. So I think I talked it to death on the radio show, and there's really nothing else left to say about it. But I brought in this is something I wrote last year about what happened when I got interviewed 2 weeks after that incident for the Herald Sun. And this is an account of running into the journalist who wrote the story quite a few months later. And this is not as serious as something like this. It's not as serious as the stuff in your book. Families haven't been destroyed by this. In fact, it's quite funny, really. But what really gets you is the fact that you've just been lied to by a journalist to your face. And even like you say, after doing sketches and things about it for years, you still naively believe that when someone's telling you something that they're not bullshitting you. So this is how I wrote it up for my website. Anyway, so I'd written earlier about something else, which was about people using the phrase, my comments were taken out of context. So I'll just pick it up halfway through. I was reminded of this myself at the weekend when I ran into a journalist from the Herald Sun down at my local shops. It was an uncomfortable encounter, given an article about me penned by this man back in August 2007. A few weeks after the well-publicised Boytown Confidential brouhaha, or funny man feud, as the Herald Sun put it, the paper's radio correspondent called to request an interview. It's not going to be another story about the trouble with me and Mick, is it? I said. Definitely not, replied the reporter. I just want to do an article about your radio show. The interview took about an hour, during which, as promised, all the questions concerned Get This, that's the radio show, save for one at the end about Mick Molloy. I stammered out as diplomatic an answer as I could muster and was assured by the reporter that it's just going to be about the show. So not another article about the feud then? Definitely not. At the end of any interview comes the awkward business of getting a photo to go with it. God help you if there's a wacky lampshade nearby, or a set of monkey bars, or someone you work with. One of you will usually end up in a headlock. But I've endlessly been in headlocks. Never in real life, always in photos. But as Sean McAuliffe once wisely observed, at least if you're, say, wearing 10 bowler hats, you don't have to pull a zany face. The hats are doing all the work. That's very good advice. It was with this in mind that I agreed to the reporter's suggestion that I be photographed clutching a disembodied steering wheel in the aftermath of a car accident, although the reasons for this setting were not immediately clear. Well, remember you talked on the show about having that car accident, he explained. Yeah, but that was like over a year ago. Sure, I just thought it'd be a nice tie-in. Right, so it's nothing to do with, say, my relationship with Mick Molloy. No. definitely not. The story's about the radio show. Definitely not. The photographer, who appeared to be wearing John English's teeth, showed up the next morning in a car that really should have been taken behind the screens years ago. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "I've just been shooting that Ian McEwan." The novelist, is he in town? Nah, not him, mate. Fucking Gandalf. I wondered who he thought I was. Tony Collette, perhaps. He announced that he wanted to take the shot down on St Kilda Esplanade, so I climbed into the rusting hulk and looked in vain for a seatbelt. Before he could start the engine, the photographer unhooked a small hose from the steering column and started blowing into it. After several minutes of wheezing, a beep finally sounded and he was able to start the ignition. He then revealed that this exhausting procedure was court mandated. "This is a price you pay for having too much fun, mate." "But if you were pissed, couldn't you just get someone else to blow into it for you?" He looked at me like this had never occurred to him. At 7 consecutive sets of lights, the motor stalled, and he was forced furiously to blow into the hose, while cars behind us honked impatiently. By the time we got to the beach, I thought he was going to have a heart attack. It took half an hour to set up the photo in the middle of the road as harsh Antarctic winds sliced in from the bay. But in the end, the shot was so tight we may as well have done it in my driveway. I felt ridiculous, but at least I would be publicising the radio show, because that's what the article was going to be about. Not me and Mick. Definitely not. I knew I'd been done over as soon as I saw the banner on the front page. A picture of Mick Malloy and myself with the headline, "Best of Enemies." The car crash photo took up the whole cover of the weekend section and was accompanied by this caption: "Their 20-year friendship is in tatters, but Martin insists he's the one in the driver's seat." That's what it said. Inside, there was yet another full-page photo of Mick and me separated by a massive crack with the headline, "Split Ends." Although wouldn't that have made more sense if the feud were over? Who knows? It was a New Zealand pun. Who knows what it was meant to be? The article spent several paragraphs talking about the bitter public spat and featured a box containing several celebrities offering their comments on the comedy split. A further box contained a second mini article about the major falling out and ended with the line, "The only people talking now are their lawyers." We both have the same lawyer, so presumably he's talking to himself. This box also contained a brief one-line mention of my radio show. When I bumped into the reporter at the weekend with what appeared to be his wife and child, I refrained from saying what I was thinking. Besides, I'd hate to have it taken out of context. But there you go. That's what can happen. I know, who cares, really? It doesn't matter. It's just a publicity for a radio show, but that is an example of how they operate.
Interesting. I think we're also, apart from talking about the media, we're also talking about comedy writing, and that's a superb example of it. And as is Tony's book, that one there, if you hold it up, A Nest of Occasionals.
Yellowing. It's been out for a while.
But
There it is.
the piece you just read, I think, appeared on the Scrivener's Fancy, which is a website that Tony has been doing. Can you tell us about the idea for the Scrivener's Fancy and the extent to which these sort of vignettes of what are going on your weekends and weeks kind of consume you now?
Well, that's right. It's like anything. Well, I mean, it's a website I started really because I was asked to write a column for a daily newspaper, which they loved until they read it. And they asked me, a daily newspaper in this town asked me to write a column just about anything I wanted. And I wrote, the first one I wrote was about, I don't know if you get DVDs, sometimes there's a little sticker and it says Alan Jones recommends. Have you seen that? It's just, and I'm going, hang on, who possibly in Melbourne gives a shit about what Alan Jones thinks about anything? And so I thought, firstly, I thought there was 4 reasons to write that article, and one was because of the oddness of Alan Jones recommends being in Melbourne video shops. The second one being that one of the films Alan Jones recommends is Buffalo Bill and the Indians by by Robert Altman. I don't know if you've seen this film, but it's a scathing satire on what is really the origins of show business in America, which is Buffalo Bill and his travelling show, how he took his own history and changed it and rewrote it and turned it into a fantasy for people's entertainment. You could say that it's actually a film about Alan Jones, if you think about it. And I don't believe that Alan Jones has ever seen Buffalo Bill and the Indians. I think he was just handed a list of DVDs that they had out and went, oh yes, Buffalo Bill, Paul Newman, bang, put that on the list. Thirdly, the fun thing I like to do is to when I buy one of these films, and so quite a few good films are under the Alan Jones Recommends label. High Plains Drifter by Clint Eastwood, which I'm imagining Alan sees as a kind of revenge fantasy. What you can do is you very carefully remove the sticker, place it on a wallet-sized plastic card, return to JB Hi-Fi, and find the most hardcore piece of gay porn you can find, and reattach it. If you really want to go to the trouble, go to Club X and find an object that you might want to attach Alan Jones Recommends to. And then the fourth reason I wanted to write that article, which was only 750 words, was that 20 years ago we used to do the Degeneration Breakfast Show, and we arrived for work one morning at 5 in the morning, and there were two blokes, this is about 1988, 89, there were two blokes sitting in the foyer in suits with briefcases, and we couldn't go on air until we agreed to sign a document saying that we would not talk about an incident which may or may not have happened to somebody a few hours earlier in a toilet block in London on the other side of the country. And we'd never even heard of Alan Jones at that time. So I wrote, I didn't even know who he was. So I put all that in the column, and the newspaper said, yeah, look, it's not really what we're looking for. We don't really want anything about you, that story about having to sign the contract. That's not very interesting. And we just want it to be like a lot of zingy one-liners, like Paul McDermott monologue, where you just have a go at everybody, just have a go at what's in the news. And we thought you could call the column Get This, which was the name of my radio show. So the Alan Jones thing could just be one of 10 things that you look at, and you could say, hey, get this, Melbourne. There's these stickers on it. And like, I don't know if you're aware, but one of the people who was on Get This is no longer with us, and I thought it's just very poor taste if I suddenly have a column called Get This in the paper. So it was very frustrating. So I went, well, but I did enjoy writing it, and I'd finished writing this book, and I thought, I like the idea of writing a column just as a piece of writing fitness. And so I just, and I wanted the column to be called Scarcely Relevant, so I just started a website called, I just thought I want a website that looks like a really pretentious literary newspaper, but which clearly isn't. And our subheading is Lowbrow Commentary in Elegant Surrounds. It's a beautiful looking website, but it's really become a repository for writing which has been rejected by newspapers, and people send us stuff and nobody gets paid. The ads aren't paid ads on the site. We only have ads on the website because if you don't have ads on a website, it doesn't really look like a website. It just looks like something maybe the Unabomber has put out. And it's just it's snowballed, and it's only 4 columns, and we have a guest column every week, and a number of people, you've sent us a fantastic, there's a great piece that you wrote about Sam Newman, which was commissioned by a newspaper and then rejected. And yeah, it's a hobby that's just got out of control. But in answer to your question, you're right. Everything is now grist for the mill. And I've broken my ribs a few weeks ago. And I remember as soon as I was told that, as soon as I shouldn't do this gesture, but as soon as they were holding up the X-ray telling me, I can remember thinking,
I'm in.
That's 1,300 words. I reckon I can get 1,300 words out of it.
Any conversation with Tony answered, oh, you've got a column there. I had a situation the other night where I was walking the streets, and I'd actually been having a little bit of a domestic at home. So I was out at 1 a.m, pacing the streets, working out my own issues, when I came across 3 guys, I reckon they were probably 16, 17 years old, who were, they were on a bottle of wine, and they kind of said, how you going, mate? Like that. And I said, I'm pretty good. How are you? And drifted straight through. And 50 metres further on, I saw a guy, a bald guy about my age, and he said, those guys, what did they say to you? And I said, they said, how was I going? And what did you say to them? I said I was going okay. And he said, right. And he was quiet and said, yeah, it's just that, they came to my daughter's party tonight, those guys, and they wrecked her party tonight. And I looked down, and he's in his left right hand he's got a baseball bat, and in his left hand he's he's just moving the bat quietly into his left hand. I'm going, no, really, the kids were not smart asses to me, mate. They were actually quite nice, and I think, are you sure it was them? And you know what, I reckon, like, they're no longer at your daughter's party, and it might just be worth going back home. And he said, yeah, you might be right. Maybe it's not worth doing anything to them, and so. With my own anger management techniques, I talked someone out of baseball batting 3 kids in a street in Northgate. And I'm telling this story to Tony, and he said, "Oh, that's a column, mate." And then 2 hours later, I see in the newspaper, in the Daily Telegraph, that someone has baseball batted in gate crashes at their daughter's party in Sydney. So, in other words, if my column may not have had an end until it turned out that because I wasn't there to steady someone down on the streets of Balmain, 3 kids got baseball battered. So, fortunately, the Scrivener's Fancy exists so that these moments in our lives get to be transcribed.
In the end, I'm glad that I didn't get the newspaper column in the end, because even though I'm not being paid, I think something does happen with newspaper columns where I think, apart from anything, they always have to be the same length. So you notice with a lot of columns you read, they all have the same kind of rhythm. They all fall into the same kind of rhythm. And I think it might be, I fear that it might be, I know people who have acted in soap operas say you do it, you just learn to act on remote control, and it actually ruins your acting ability because you no longer can respond spontaneously. And I worry that is what would happen if I'd done a column. It would fall into the same rhythms, and you wouldn't be able to write a lot of the stuff that I write in the column on. Well, I mean, this is something that anyone who writes a blog knows, so I'm not saying anything amazing, but it's like, I can write one about the Hawk movie, which I've done this week, or I can spend 2,400 words writing about the second half of the movie Alvin Rides Again. Now, I don't think I would be allowed to do that. In
2,400 words.
I know it is a bizarre. I don't know if you've seen Alvin Rides Again. It turns into a horror. It is one of the most bizarre films ever made in this country, awaiting rediscovery. And I wrote someone I know who writes. How can I put this? Because we're being recorded. How can I put this diplomatically? Somebody I know who works for a newspaper said that there was a column in that newspaper, and the editor told them that it hit the 3 main things that they want in a newspaper column. And this column had in it talk of dieting, it made considerable mention of MasterChef, and it canvassed a celebrity feud. So, I think once you have that kind of pressure on you, I mean, that's why you're going to write a story about MasterChef every week. Or, let's write something about Twilight, whatever's there. You're not going to write about more interesting things if that's what the editor's telling you they want. And you just never know. And with the column, like I say, we'll write 2,400 words. Sometimes it'll be 450. Sometimes it'll be fiction. I wrote the most popular one I've written was one about I just rewrote Cormac McCarthy's The Road as though it was starring Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. And it was like one of those bizarre notions you have at 4 a.m, and I'm going, no one's going to get this. I don't know anyone who'd read either The Road or seen a road movie and put it together. And that one's just constantly, I'll get emails from other side of the world mentioning that one. So it's you can write what you want on the internet. Bang, there's a headline for you. Who would have known?
Do you know the little details of life that do end up in the sorts of columns that Tony's writing also often make it into novels as well. And everyone always says, you draw on personal experience. And I don't have a father that's been involved in a spectacular 3-way sex scandal. But I do have, there are little moments in this book which...
Pretty interesting bloke, though.
Yeah, which really did happen to me. I mean, there's one scene where Charlie, who's the footballer, is in a nightclub, and this is kind of the seminal scene. The scandal is almost right upon him at this point. And he's down. He's down that he's no longer playing. He's down that his cachet in life is kind of lost. And and he's talking to a sports reporter. There's been rumours in the past about him being gay, and is he the first Premier League footballer to come out? And he's not gay, and he finds those rumours difficult to deal with. And anyway, he has a situation where he speaks to a reporter, a sports reporter, and spends the entire time thinking he's got his hand on the leg of a couch, but actually he's got his hand on the sports reporter's leg. And the reason I included that scene is that at the aftermath of the Einstein factor 3 years ago, there was a wildly camp Doctor Who specialist who came down, special topic Doctor Who, who worked at one of the universities of technology in Sydney. And I'm sitting there, we must have talked for 35 minutes. We were talking for hours about, what he was up to, what I was up to, how much we'd enjoyed the show, drink. And then suddenly the armrest I was leaning on moved, like, and this, he was wearing like a little Robin Hood hat or something like that. He was so camply gay, it was ridiculous. And I had to say, oh my God, I've had my hand on your leg throughout this, haven't I? And he said, yes, you have. And I said, so you must think that I'm coming on to you, mustn't you? And he said, it had crossed my mind, yes. I said, I actually thought your leg was the armrest of the chair. And so that moment of embarrassment in my life gets transcribed into one of the more embarrassing moments of Charlie's life. And that happens throughout. We bet on hymns when I was in year 12. We'd bet on which hymn would come up. There was a kid in our class whose dad was a bookie, and then his mum left the dad to marry another bookie. So he basically had bookies just running through his bloodlines, and he ran a book on the hymn at each school assembly. And so there's, hymn lotto is in the book. We also played a game at school where you'd loosen your shoelaces and try and kick your shoe as far as you could, and the person who kicked their shoe the least distance could be kicked by the rest of the boys between neck and hips with the non-shoed foot. So you could be kicked with the socked foot if you were the worst of the kickers. The game was called You Play, You Pay. And the game actually opens. The reason that Lucas Decker wins a tabloid writing competition in order to get a job at this tabloid newspaper, a traineeship, is that his You Play, You Pay essay it gets him that gig. So it's amazing how, even when you're writing fiction, the little truisms from personal experience that creep in, there's considerable numbers of them, but just for the fact that you can write those things and make them sound truer than if you're actually making things up.